Well, hey, man, we are live, brother. How you doing today, Chief Humphrey?
What's going on, man? How you doing, bro?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Doing good, man. It's glad everybody can join us on You and the Law podcast show on Facebook Live, and so hopefully we'll get some people on to chat with us and share your thoughts and comments with us today. On our second episode of You and the Law on Restream. So I'm going to send you the link. Hold on just a second. Uh, all right, you got the link?
I do.
Okay. All right. And so want to make sure that we are on Facebook and well, we've got our listeners. So, today, Keith, we want to talk about, well, obviously today, is what, January the 6th, the 1 year anniversary of the insurrection that took place on the nation capital. So um, I don't think too many people will forget January the 6th.
No, I think you're right, man. I remember I was in a meeting when it happened, and someone interrupted the meeting and was telling me about it, and I didn't know it was of the magnitude that it was, and just seeing the carnage and the disruption that was going on was just unbelievable, especially say in 2021, just to see that was just, man, that was disruptive and very disturbing.
Yeah, and since then, Keith, there's a lot of people who feel like that it wasn't an insurrection. Uh, Everybody has their own opinions about what took place that day, and it's just real unfortunate that lives were lost that day, and there are people who are still to this day who do not believe what took place, and the
One
fact
thing,
that you've got
when you say they don't believe it, I think they believe it. I think they don't believe it was anything wrong with what happened. I
yeah.
think you have those individuals that believed it was appalling. I think you have those individuals who don't have a response, and you have those individuals who didn't think anything wrong, that was what was needed, and um, that was disturbing. We have some of those individuals that serve in law enforcement that feel that way too.
Yeah, and that's a disturbing part about it, the fact that you've got law enforcement officers, retired and active, who went to DC. Some will say they didn't take any part in what happened. Uh, but I think when just to me, the appearance of being there uh, would lead a lot of people to believe that why would you go there uh, and you're a police officer or whatever field of law enforcement that you're in, and just put yourself in that position. And so, thinking about obviously probably some of those people a year later probably thought that they shouldn't have attended, but they did. And so it's just real unfortunate that you've had so many people that that are still going back and forth about uh, what the president said and what he didn't say.
Well, I will tell you, that people fall back on their First Amendment rights. And I've said this before. I totally agree with First Amendment rights, being able to peacefully assemble. I guess the action word there is peacefully. And I think anytime you have any type of disorder that gets out of control, especially when you have a police officer who was killed and others that were injured, and some that are still trying to get over what happened that day. That was not a peaceful protest. That was not a peaceful assembly. I think that was what it ended up to be, um, what it was planned to be, and that being an insurrection. And and now then there's some more talk today regarding the election, whether or not the election was handled fairly. So we're starting this all over again.
Yeah. Well, and and Keith, again, when you look at one of the things that I heard the President Biden say today was the fact that there were multiple other elections that took place that day, and the fact that you had uh, there were governor races, there were Senate races, there were other races beside the presidential race, but nobody has said anything about what took place with those other races, that they were not legitimate uh, elections, but it's just the presidential election.
Well, I'll tell you, it's just I am just I go back into 2022. We're still having this discussion about what that was and who won the presidency and was the presidency rigged and it's just it's crazy how when things don't go the way of certain people, and I think that's right or left. When you especially when you get to the extreme on each type, it doesn't go the way that um, individuals affiliated with extreme left, extreme right, or any type of um, any group that has an agenda. I think there's never going to be an outcome that they prefer. There's going to always be questions on how it was handled or if it was equitable. So um, I think this is going to happen. There's going to be more of this to come. As time goes by.
Yeah, and people have their own opinions about everything, and so we'll obviously this will probably continue on until the next election, but because of just the fact that you've got a lot of people who don't agree what took place. But Keith, we got one of our faithful listeners uh, on the show. We want to welcome her to the show, and it's somebody that you worked with when you were down in Norman on a couple of projects. And so, Seisha, glad that you are able to tune in to the show today.
Hey, what's going on, Sasha? How you doing? It's good to see you. Good to hear from you.
Yeah, likewise, man. I'm still trying to work out this, to get the chat room stuff open, and so I'm gonna have to. I can read your message, but replying back to it is not letting me do so. So there's still a few things I need to work out. So I think you can see the message. She says, "Hey, good to see you guys." So. But Keith, the top the topic that we chose to talk about today is something that I think is not really being talked about a lot in policing, and it kind of hits on the side of religion a little bit, and so I think it's really important to have this conversation to talk about is there faith in policing? And I think some people will say, what do you mean by is there faith in policing? And I think if you go back and you look at all the things that have happened over the past year, the past decades, you have to wonder, do police officers, what are they looking at anything spiritual on the spiritual side? How were they raised? I think you and I, we were raised in the church growing up, uh, and you're taught how to treat people. And so, I think I asked you a question earlier. Uh, what does that look like?
I think it looks like knowing how you go home, how you come home, go and come to work safely every day. How when you're at work, how you are, um, how you're covered. It's not saying that you have to be a person that's in church every week, or that you're a person that has to continue to witness to individuals, but your faith. How do you know how you make it home every day? Do you know how your family stays safe? What do you believe in? Are you really doing the right thing out there? How do you feel when you make a decision? Are you doing it because it's the right decision to make? And where do you get that? Um, those where do you get that? Where does that come from?
Hmm.
I think that's one of the things I will say that is frowned upon in law enforcement, is having the discussions regarding religion. However,
Yeah.
we all, majority of large mid to large size police departments have chaplains. They have a chaplaincy program. Um, many of those individuals, many of these departments, they have, especially such as New York and other cities, they have chaplains of various denominations, and so the resources are there. It are you utilizing those resources, or do you think those resources are um, there for other people?
Yeah.
And so that's a very, it's two things that people are very uncomfortable discussing, especially in law enforcement, and that is politics and religion. And
Yeah.
and I think there are those individuals who are afraid to elaborate on their beliefs, their religious beliefs.
Yeah.
But they will elaborate on their political beliefs, though.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up, is the fact that they will talk about their political beliefs, but when you talk about religion, you do have, you get a lot of pushback, especially from the FOP. And so, um, I think, another question I asked was that, uh, are police officers out of touch with society?
I think the answer to that is I think they can be, or all no, but I think there are some that they live in their own little bubble, and
Hmm.
that's why you have an uproar from communities that they want to see officers live, requirements that require officers to live in the cities that they work in. I'm not a firm believer. I'm not a strong believer in that, but I do understand what they're saying, because if you're part of the community, be all in. Don't just
Yeah.
come and collect a paycheck. But you can't tell people where to live.
Yeah.
Everybody has a right to live where they want to live, but um, you have to have an interest in that city if you're going to live there, because you know what, especially if you're going to go, if you're in a profession like we are, and you're going to go there each and every day, taking that risk on your life, uh, you better have an interest in that city, if for nothing else, um, to ensure that you can make it home every day, and that you can go home to your family. So I think you do
Hmm.
have an obligation or responsibility to have an interest in where you work. It's
Exactly.
got to be all. It's got to be all in.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, we got Jamie Davis, who made a comment, said, what is constantly aggravating to me is that it seems that everyone is being looked at and hunted down in this travesty, except for the ones who orchestrated this mess that Trump started. Um, you've got a lot of people who have been charged. I think yesterday um, the Attorney General held a press conference where he talked about a lot of people have been charged and they're still charging people. And so, Jamie, you bring up a good point about uh, how you got other people who are commit crimes, but they're not as uh, actively sought out as some people are in other crimes. So when you look at what's going on and what took place with the insurrection, I think uh, well over what 500 people have been charged so far, or
Yeah, I
it could
think
be
in
more than
Australia.
that.
Well, I think they've identified 450, and then
Hmm.
they're looking for 350 more.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I will tell you that the same process that is required for all criminal actions, it still has to be followed through in this situation.
Yeah.
I know it's frustrating, but one of the things we still don't know what else is coming out of that, what's going to come out of this investigation, because every day we're still finding or hearing about different little parts of the puzzle, emails, text messages that people are they're finding that were said during that time, and it does point back to um, the former administration, and so it's going to be amazing to see what more is revealed in the upcoming months and even the upcoming years. It's not going to be anything that's going to happen overnight. Uh, it's going to take some time, but I think when they present a package to the American people, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff, a lot of answers. Now the question becomes, will people believe it? That's going to be the question. Who's going to believe it, and what type of results? What's it going to lead to? What's the ending result?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, hey Keith, I want to remind everybody if you're just now tuning in, you're listening to You and the Law podcast show. We're on Facebook Live, and if you missed any parts of this broadcast show, you can go to our Facebook page, and you can listen to the rebroadcast of this show and many other shows that you can find us on. You can find us on Anchor. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts. So wherever you listen to streaming, you can definitely find You and the Law. Just search and subscribe to You and the Law on Spotify and Anchor and many others. So, um, you know, Keith, eh, obviously a lot of people are just now finding us on Facebook Live, but we've been on for over almost close to 2 years, and we were on other uh, podcast platform, and so we decided to do something different to where we can kind of get more people to listen to the show and interact with us. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of good things that's going to happen over the next couple of months with our podcast show.
Yeah, we just to everybody who's just tuning in. Good evening to everybody. We're excited about having you here. We're excited about this new phase in our podcast. It's like Virgil said, we decided to go to a different platform. We think that this serves our listeners better, and we're excited about it. So, tell your friends about it. If there's something you'd like to hear us talk about, please send that to our Facebook, or even put it in the queue tonight, and we'll work very hard to try to make that a topic that we can have in the future. But
Yeah,
Virgil, I'll tell you, I know where my faith is. My faith is very strong, and I know that once I leave the house or once I come home at the end of the day, I know the reason why. It's not by
mhm,
luck. It's based on the fact that I had a covering um, over me, and the decisions that I make also are guided by my faith. People ask me when you're about to discipline someone, how do you do that? Well, discipline someone's not easy at all. But one
right.
of the things that I found that helps me is that once it hits my desk for a final recommendation or my final decision, I'll take that, look at it, sit it to the side, and I um, ask for guidance. And what I want to make sure that I'm unbiased in my decision, that I give the opportunity, the person, um, fairness. I'm fair with that individual. But if you don't if you don't think faith is what gets you through, I don't know what to. And it doesn't matter what your denomination is. You have to have a strong faith.
Yeah,
Um, you know, I think people are afraid to have that discussion at work because they don't understand, um, what religion, what Christianity means. They don't understand it. And so instead of asking, they'll say something that might be taken the wrong way, or it might cause more problems, or it might cause a division between. But you have to ask someone, what it's not offensive to ask someone, what denomination are you? What religion are you?
yeah,
That's not offensive. It's when you start trying to force your beliefs on people, force your discussion, try to force them to listen, and that's when we get in. That's where we get in trouble.
yeah. Well, and Keith, one of the things that kind of get you kind of go back to where you are, if an officer is injured or there's a death of an officer, uh, uh, the priest or the pastor or your chaplain goes to the hospital and he prays with that family. They pray with the police officers. So my question to you is, what's so wrong with having that chaplain? Excuse me, man. I've got a bad cough, so hopefully everybody can overlook my cough. So, but what's so wrong with having that chaplain or somebody come to the police department before these officers go out, and there's a prayer that's held with those officers before they hit the street?
I don't think there's anything. I think it's pretty bad when you have to ask someone, um, if you're offended. I think we've gotten to a point where we have to preface everything by "I hope you're not offended," but there's nothing wrong with that. If you can find someone that will say a prayer for the entire shift, um, I think that says you don't never know that can do a lot for a person. You don't never know whose heart you'll touch in that. And that might be a moment where someone just needed to hear that, and to strengthen their walk, in their faith. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that there are people who take it the wrong way, and they take that as if you're trying to conform them to a certain religion or belief, and that's not true. All you're asking, someone's coming in and they're asking for protection and safe in your safety and for your well-being. That's all they're asking. But um, I think there's some people that are just afraid to hear that. They're afraid of that. They're afraid that means um, they have to be a believer. You're going to make them believer or make them believe. You're going to force something down their throat. I mean, those are the things that I've heard. Oh, here goes another one of those. Um, trying to make us um, Christians, or trying to make us think a certain way, or here to come bringing the church into government, and so
Yeah,
those a little bit. That's what makes people a little bit reluctant to do so.
yeah. Well, and and that's the thing that you've got so many people with their different beliefs about, especially religion, and the fact that if you can have a certain pastor come in, then somebody will say, "Well, that's not my faith," and so why did you bring this person in? But I think one of the, when we look at everything that's happened in policing, just uh, last week, Keith, there was a 13-year-old killed the day after Christmas. This 13-year-old was in Florida. Parents had bought him a dirt bike, and so obviously he shouldn't have been riding a dirt bike out on the public street. There's a video you see of him pulling up to a gas station, putting gas in it, and you see a police officer. As soon as he takes off from the gas pump, there's a brief chase, and this young man who's 13 years old loses control of this dirt bike, and he dies at the scene of the accident. And so, you know, you sit back and you ask yourself and you reflect upon the things that police officers do. Was it necessary? Obviously, this officer didn't know that this kid was 13 years old, but you can look at a person and kind of gauge the age of them. But was it necessary to chase this person in, which was a very short chase that ended the life of this 13-year-old? And you're going to have some people just going to say, well, hey, guys, he made that decision. But when you go back and you ask yourself, when the things that we've seen out of police officers, are police officers out of touch with society? Or police officers, uh, are they always thinking that I've got to get the bad guy before I go home?
I think you have some. I think that's in. I think deep down inside, that's in everybody. You don't want to see the bad guy get away, but it comes down to the reality of it is how many people live in a real world, how many people live in a fantasy world of TV, how many people have tunnel vision, how many people are so focused on the prize they don't look at how they got here or look at the what it takes to get there. They just want
Yeah.
the prize. So I think I, I I know that there are those individuals. I've been there that you want in your shift you want to catch every bad guy you can. And then I think a lot of it comes with maturity. A lot of that comes through training. A lot of it comes from life lessons. A lot of that comes from things that we see that are occurring throughout the nation. Um, and we should learn from all those things. I don't like saying this, but through almost every tragedy, at some point there's a lesson learned um, by everyone. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes that to occur. But what are we doing as police chiefs? What are we doing with that incident? Are we not talking about that incident? Are we not? You know, are we not? Critiquing that incident, making that part of our roll call trainings, and even part of our academy training to determine. And sometimes you'll have that resistancy because people believe that you're armchair quarterbacking.
Hmm.
Maybe you are. Maybe you are armchair quarterbacking, but I think there's a difference between armchair quarterbacking and critiquing. Armchair quarterbacking is finding complete fault with everything. You don't see anything right. If I was there, I'd do this. If I was there, I'd do this. I wouldn't have done that. Where critiquing is saying, okay, let's go through this scenario and let's see what happened from the start to the finish. Not necessarily what you would have done because you weren't there, but just kind of saying, okay, what can you see how this went wrong? What could have been done differently? What is this a policy issue or what? I mean, that's how you learn. So there's a big difference between armchair quarterback and critiquing, and we don't take the time to learn the difference between the two.
Exactly. Well, Keith, I want to remind everybody who's just now tuning in on Facebook Live that you're listening to You in the Law podcast show on Facebook Live. And we definitely thank you guys for tuning in and listening to our conversation today. So we're going to be, just to remind everybody, we're going to be live every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we definitely thank you for taking the time out as you're on social media to check out our Facebook page. And so, and just join in on the conversation. Tonight we're talking about um, the spiritual side of policing. Is there spirituality in policing? And it'd be good to have a pastor on to kind of talk to us about some things, but because I think this is a part of the conversation that's missing, Keith, is the fact that when you go back and you look at what happened with George Floyd, Derek Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, and you have to ask yourself, at any point, did this man ever think that, hey, there's another human being that I have my knee on? Is there any side of what he did that said, this isn't right? But and he didn't. And so I just think that there is and this isn't for all police officers. We know there's a lot of good men and women who put on a uniform every day, who serve and protect their communities. But as a whole, are we having these conversations with ourselves, Keith? With our administrators having these conversations with their command staff, or the command staff having a conversation with police officers? Because it's almost like, no, we can't talk about this because it's going to offend somebody.
I think that's the key. I think we have gotten into we are becoming a society that we're intimidated or afraid to say the wrong thing when sometimes it's the right thing. No one says that you have to force someone to believe in what you believe in, but it's okay to have a moment of silence. It's okay to say, "Do you mind if I pray?" And you shouldn't have to ask people if they get offended. Uh, but I go back to, I think it starts at the top. One
Yeah.
thing I could say about our mayor, every meeting we has with the department heads, we start in prayer,
Hmm.
and that was really big during the pandemic, the
Hmm.
start of the pandemic back in early 2020, and what he would do is go through and he recognized that each and every department head was of a different um, belief, different religion, and he recognized each one. Today, Director Smith, would you lead us in prayer? And that director would lead prayer in their respective. Really, it was really fascinating and unique, and it got that conversation. Oh, I didn't know you were Muslim, or I didn't know that you were Jewish. I didn't know that you were Catholic. I mean, I didn't know you were Methodist. I didn't know you were Pentecostal. It really started that discussion. It's the same thing in law enforcement. You know what's interesting? You have on Sunday mornings, you have officers who, while they're at work, they go by the churches and they sit for service, and they go by if they're working evenings, and if there's a church in their area has a service on Wednesday evenings. They go by that. There were officers that stopped by on New Year's Eve. Officers stopped by on Christmas Eve. They find locations to go by and uh, and serve. And so it's happening. And I think that's why you see that increase also, Virgil, where you see police departments creating those various partnerships with the faith-based organizations. A lot of that is based on the fact that you have an officer that may be affiliated with the church,
Hmm.
and they want to sign their church up with that program. Last Friday night, one of the young ladies who's one of the commanders of our street crimes unit invited her pastor in to say prayer at the briefing before the officers went out, for the street crime officers and all the special units went out last week on New Year's Eve detail. And no pushback from that. Matter of fact, the officers appreciated them doing that. So it comes down to the fact of, are we forcing people to do things, or are we giving people the opportunity to join when they want to? And the other thing is, if you say, "Do you mind if I pray for you all?" Is there going to be someone that says no? They might be too afraid to say no. What happens if that officer says, "No, I don't want you praying. I don't. I'm offended that you want to pray." Do you ask that officer to get up and leave? Do you ask that officer to stay? Do you ask that minister to leave? Do you just not do anything? I think those are some of the unanswered questions that people are afraid to get the answer to.
Yeah, Keith, and I think again, so many everybody is kind of caught up into hey, you show up for briefing, you get assigned to where you're going. Hey, uh, y- your mind is always triggered on how do the main job of what we're supposed to be doing is protecting and serving. But
That is
we
correct.
also know, but we also know there is an element of people that they're going to commit crimes, and that's what police officers are there for, to do their job. But you know, oftentimes when we look back at the culture of policing, we have to ask ourselves, uh, the culture of policing has changed some, but another question is, has it changed to keep up with society? Because the police culture wants individuals to change their behaviors, but a deeper question is, has the culture of policing changed with society?
I think in some situations it has, but I think we're far behind. I think, um, I think we always think about technology, and we always know we're going to be behind the curve uh, in technology. I mean, because you buy something today, tomorrow is something different. But I think us not getting out into the public and actually listening to the public and knowing what's going on around the nation, what's going on in your state, county, in your city. I think that does uh, put us behind in society. It's difficult to catch up. We got to get on top of things before we have to start being those individuals. I didn't understand this until about 20 years ago. I met a couple of futurists, and basically, you know, there's actually courses at many colleges regarding futurism, futurist, and talking to a gentleman, PhD, college professor, that was a futurist, and he was projecting and talking about law enforcement,
Hmm.
and people are looking at him like, man, what are you talking about? Number one, you're not a police officer. Number two, you're just saying something. But if you sit down and deeply paid attention to what he was saying, he was basically talking about um, technology and the importance of faith-based organizations and importance of having partnerships with nonprofits. And he saw that our we were going to see increases in our unsheltered communities, and our communities with mental illness, and that we're going to have to start looking at different ways of policing and not always have badge and gun carriers handling these issues. And people were looking like, yeah, right. But if you sit down and you really look, if you're really a student of the profession, um, you can set your organization up to where you're not that far behind.
Exactly.
Where we should be doing it all the time. I'll give you an example. If you have that good relationship with your community leaders, your faith-based organizations, nonprofits, the gatekeepers in the community, when you have something major that happens, you've already set that platform to minimize a disruption in the city or wherever. You already have that relationship, and I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about building those relationships to where we don't get caught off guard, and that we're not trying to rush. Because if you don't have that relationship prior to a major incident, it doesn't look authentic when you try to call someone an hour after the incident happens, and you've got to sit there and have that long discussion, and you're trying to build that relationship. Then that relationship should be already established to where when you call them, they answer the phone. It's like, where do you need me? Not where you've got to have a 30-minute discussion where you're trying to defend what's going on. Where do you need me so we can get in and roll our sleeves up with you, chief, with you, mayor, so we can you know uh, kind of settle this down or
Hmm.
calm the waters before the storm hits.
Yeah. Well, Keith, we had Nikki send us a comment. She said, in general, what do African American police officers feel about the level of police brutality captured on video?
Well, I think um, it's sickening. They believe that it's, I know me, sickening. Um, you look at that, and that's not the first time that person's done that. That's just the first time it's been captured on video. Um, Here we go again. Those are things that they hear, that we feel. There are some that they don't see anything wrong with it. Those are very few. But I will tell you, just police officers in general. We talk about African American officers. Let me just talk about officers in general. The majority of the officers out here are disheartened when they see. I'm not heard anyone, but maybe just a few people have something other than negative to say about other that had that were upset. Very few people were not upset. The majority of the people, I'm talking a large majority of the people that I spoke with internally, externally, that wear badges, were so disheartened and heartbroken and were so embarrassed when they see any type of excessive force issue that occurs. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, uh, any of these incidents that have involved African Americans where excessive force or recklessness has occurred, it angers uh, it angers African American officers, and it also angers other officers of color, especially when you see this so brutal. And we're starting to see more officers uh, that are being open and honest about how something is now. They're not as afraid to voice their concerns as they did in the past, because we have a new generation of officers that are very open and honest about what they see and how
Hmm.
they feel, and they're not afraid to debate with even supervisors regarding. And you have to explain to that officer why you think that's okay. Why do you think that officer didn't do anything wrong when he's taken somebody's life or he's injured someone? So now the generation that we're dealing with now is, well, you explain to me why that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and and I think a lot of people in the black community, Keith, when you ask a question like, what do African American police officers feel about the level of police brutality that we've seen? Oftentimes, the general public don't really see a lot of African American police officers who are coming out, being vocal about what has occurred. And we've talked about this on previous podcast shows where those officers are probably looking at what will be some type of retaliation if they do come out and speak. Um, and because I think oftentimes, everybody needs their job, but you've got some people who are, we'll say, in control, and that has the control of that person's livelihood. They may say, well, you know, hey, Bob, hey, man, you're kind of radical. You're speaking up and you're acting like you're not one of us. And so, oftentimes, a lot of people in the black community are wondering where are the black officers at because they don't see them coming out and addressing the black community when these things happen. And I think that's an issue that really needs to take place. We've talked about it before. What will that do to that officer in that agency that he works for? But I think when you see more officers come out and address those things and say these are things that we don't accept, you'll find more people in the black community are who won't just say, "Well, hey, you're part of the problem," even though you're black. You're
Right.
kind of part of the problem.
Well, we're all, when we put this uniform on, what the community sees in some situations is they see the badge and they don't care who's behind the badge. And so when you have those incidents that we've had over the past 5 or 6 years involving people of color, um, you're part of the problem. Hey, you look like that person who was killed or severely injured. Why didn't you stop that? Why was there not any black officers on the scene during the George Floyd, Mr. Floyd was murdered? Would they have stopped me? These are questions that I've been asked for, and
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and so how do you answer that question? You answer that question with the fact that that's not the police department, that's not the police profession that I joined, and if I would have been there, that wouldn't have been handled that way. If I would have been there, I would have immediately stopped it. I wouldn't have been standing around with my hands in my pocket, looking around, worried about what everybody else. We talk about that young officer. One was a trainee, and people, well, he was a trainee and he was following his. But one of the things, in I
and
guarantee you, there's a policy in the. I guess I know. I'm pretty sure there's a policy in the Minneapolis Police Department that talks about you will not, if you see someone doing something criminally wrong or morally wrong against policy or state law, you will intercede.
you have a
And
duty to
so
intervene.
you have a duty to intervene.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and Keith, they had that policy. They had
yeah,
that
that policy
policy in
exists.
place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Prior to
But
this incident.
but I'd be interested to know what that atmosphere was like and how many people actually had gone and talked to supervisors about Chauvin and his prior behavior. Because like I said, that's not and he trained people. So he was a trainer.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to be able to sit down with his trainees over the years, get them together and just kind of talk to them about a day in the life of
Of
being
being with
trained
him.
by him, being
Yeah.
with him. There's just
Yeah.
no telling what you would hear.
Yeah.
But apparently he was a vital part of that shift. And what I mean by that, he was a um, veteran officer, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people looked up to him. And um, man, he knows what he's doing. They're getting this mindset, depending on where you are. They're getting that mindset that this person is a criminal. That's why a lot of your minority communities of color feel as though uh, we're being dehumanized when you see
Yeah.
things like that, or some of the things that they hear officers say when encountering individuals.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to, are we dehumanized? Are minority communities dehumanized by law enforcement?
Yeah. Well, Keith, Nikki asked another question. She wants to know, can you offer pertinent steps that African American young men should take during traffic stops with a police officer with questionable behavior? Nikki, this is something that we've talked about on our podcast show before. And the fact that, and that's kind of how we come up with the name of You and the Law, because we want to be able to share information with the minority community about what their rights are when they're dealing with police officers. And so, we've seen so many traffic stops that have went totally different than what they should have happened. And so, Keith, what would you say to Nikki about how young men should conduct themselves when you have an officer who is really on the verge of just his attitude is out of control and his behavior is out of control. Because on a traffic stop, to be honest with you guys, there is not a whole lot you can do as a citizen other than either record what's taking place, and if you do that, now you've kind of pissed off the officer because he feels like you don't have the right to do so. But Keith, I think that's a question that so many parents are
Yeah.
wondering: how should they young children conduct themselves during a traffic stop?
It's a shame that you have to have lessons on what to do when you're stopped by police. Number one, I tell all citizens, anyone who asks me this question, just remember the side of the road is not where court should be held. That's number one. Number two, always keep the inside of your car illuminated, hands on the steering wheel. Listen carefully to what the officer's asking you for. Just listen. If you feel that that officer is getting out of control, dictate, open a dialogue and dictate what your actions are. They ask for your registration. Sir, my registration, or ma'am, my registration is in my glove compartment or in my center console. Um, I'm going to be opening that now to get that. Um, Here, where are you headed? I'm headed on my way home. Don't say, well, why are you stopping me? Why do you want to know? Just answer the questions. If you feel as though that officer is getting out of control, and by me being unprofessional and not being not respecting you as a citizen, then you have the right to ask for that officer to contact his supervisor and get a supervisor on scene. You can also call 911 and you can say and let them know I am out with an officer. Uh, I am at this location, because every traffic stop should be called out via the radio. And so my name is such and such. I'm driving this kind of car. I was just stopped by an officer. I'm at the 2200 block of Main Street. This officer is being very rude to me. He's not allowing me to talk. Could you have a supervisor come out on scene? Um, that's the thing you can have. If you decide not to do that and you still believe that that officer is not being professional, you have a right to make a complaint against that officer. Even if that officer says, I'm not going to give you his name, don't sit there and argue with that officer. That officer's information is on that citation. Get a car number, get the officer's badge number, but try not to get in. Try to do everything possible. Don't get into a confrontation with that officer. But the main thing is just listen, be respectful, and follow the verbal commands of that officer. Um, and a large percentage of those officers are going to walk you through the traffic stop, and they're going to leave you um, where you feel that you've been respected. You might not like the outcome, but
Yeah.
at least they respect. They were respectable. I'm sorry, respectful in the way they delivered the service. So the main thing is just keep your hands on the steering wheel, roll your windows down, don't make any furtive, immediate movements, and ask the officer, "Can you explain to me what you're asking me to do, sir?" And then, okay, this is where my insurance, this is where my registration is. I'm a licensed concealed carrier. My gun is in my glove compartment. I will wait until you give me instructions on how to get the gun removed by insurance from my driver's license. I always from the glove compartment. I always tell people to have your insurance on the um, sun visor, to where all you have to do is pull it down. But you know, those are the things that I tell people. We have in my department, we have a card that we give to that's in English and in Spanish, what to do when stopped by the police. And you have
Yeah.
to know your rights also. A lot of citizens aren't familiar with their rights.
With their
And
rights, exactly.
so they don't, know, yeah, you do have to sign a citation. A citation is an arrest. People don't know that. It's actually an arrest. And when you sign it, you're saying that you promise to appear before court. Can an officer arrest you for not signing the citation? Yes, they can. In certain situations, yes, they can. And so you signing that ticket does not mean that you're guilty. It clearly says that. Sign the citation, and then you have the right to take it to court, pay it, or send it to court, pay it, or receive some type of deferred adjudication. But you do that once the citation's been issued. Don't sit there and argue about the citation, because you're not going to win that argument.
Yeah.
Chances are you're going to still get that citation. And if it gets to the point of being belligerent, you're probably going to go to jail.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, we got another person on uh, that asked the court. Vincent Stewart said that he was a police officer back in 1994, and he said that just 2 weeks ago, a man learned that he was a police officer, and his statement was, "Oh, so you were one of them, and probably think police officers killing people are okay or is okay." Um, I think you got people uh, who they look at black police officers and feel like, well, hey, you're just one of them, and so everybody has uh, that type of attitude because And again, I think that just kind of goes back to how, how the voice of black police officers really needs to be expressed a lot more. You have some who express their opinions, but you have some who don't. And
Go
you
along to
know,
get along.
yeah, yeah, going along to get along. And then Vincent also says when they were talking about when people on the other side of law don't necessarily see a white officer or a black officer, they just see a police officer. And Vincent, one of the things that we've talked about on our podcast show is the fact that uh, there is this blue wall. Everybody says that, hey, we are all men of blue. But in reality, there is so much racism within police departments that the culture of policing uh, has has changed some. But when you go back and you look at how uh, some police officers have been treated at their departments, and the fact that uh, black police officers only make up what Keith, less than 10% of the population of police officers around the
I,
country.
I would give them I would say maybe 15 just to be kind of,
Just to
just a
give it
little
a
bit
little,
liberal. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And so you've got people who you know again, I think a lot of we have a lot more black women who are police chiefs. We've got we've seen a lot more African American who have risen up through the ranks to become police chiefs or become supervisors in their police departments. But
And thankful for organizations like Noble
yeah,
and National Black Police Association who who encouraged uh, people of color to put in for those organizations, and they were established. Because I can tell you, prior to Noble and NBPA, there were maybe one or two African American police chiefs, and I don't believe there were any
police chiefs at
female
all.
African
Yeah,
American police chiefs at all.
yeah.
But then you look at from 1974 to 1976, so from 74 on, you see the transition to uh, more diverse leadership in police departments.
Hmm.
And even on the state, federal, you see black female sheriffs, black sheriffs, special agents in charge, uh, uh, U.S. marshals, police chief, local police chiefs, state police chief commanders. If it hadn't been for those organizations, if it hadn't been for individuals like Don Stafford in Dallas, who was the first African American assistant chief, if it had been for like Clarence Hunter here in the city of Little Rock, who was the first African American assistant chief. If it hadn't been for those individuals and others, Charles Ramsey, um, Lee Brown, hadn't been for the Carmen Best
Yeah,
um, and, uh, and all Vera Bumpers, uh, CJ over in Memphis, and those leaders. If it hadn't been for those individuals, you and I wouldn't be sitting here.
exactly.
And so I just want to say that's how it's evolved to have allowed you and I to sit in these positions. It wasn't because we weren't qualified. We just were not given an opportunity. And this one here talks about Nikki's asking overall or in general, do black police officers tread lightly or differently with white suspects than they do with black suspects? No, I don't think so. Now, if you were to flip flop that, I think that you do have white officers that sometimes feel that they have to tread a little bit lightly around black suspects or minority suspects because there are some that feel as though they're going to be accused of excessive force if not. I've had white officers say, "Well, I didn't arrest this person because I didn't want to get complained on. I didn't arrest this person, or I didn't shoot this person because," and they were in a deadly force situation where they would have been justified, but they didn't shoot this person because they did not want to feel the wrath of the minority community. And so I think you can flip that to where I have not heard any African American officers say that they tread lightly, but I have heard white officers say that they do policing a little bit different now when it comes to minority communities, as far as maybe taking kind of a hands-off approach to certain things because they don't want to get complained on, or they don't want to be in the spotlight of being called a racist.
Yeah. Well, Keith, I want to remind everybody that you're listening to You and the Law podcast show on Facebook Live. And, typically we kind of, we're about an hour show, but we've got a few messages. So we're going to take these messages. And Vincent asked a question. He says, "That's true, Virgil. When I worked at the sheriff's office in our hometown, I was the only black deputy, and the newly elected sheriff called me into his office and said, 'Stewart, do me a favor and quit, so I don't have to fire you. You have about a week to find a job.'" Uh, Keith. Vincent is from my home state. He's from my hometown of Hobbs, New Mexico, and he worked for the Lee County Sheriff Department, and a sheriff department that actually started my law enforcement career at in 1984. Uh, and so um,
I was in
I
middle school.
you were, yeah, right, whatever, yeah, you were in middle school, okay. But one of the things that got that struck me, Keith, was in there was a deputy, there was a guy that worked in the jail who I didn't know this man and he didn't know me, but uh, it took about a month for me to realize how racist this man was. And so there was a black gentleman who lived in the county seat was in Lovington, New Mexico, where the jail was. And so one night, this guy who was a local drunk, he was, he would sing to himself, and this deputy got mad, and he just hauled off, and I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna shut this inn up. Now everybody kind of looked at me like, you know, and I was shocked that this man even said what he said. And so I'm 20 something years old, and I'm just like, man, I know you didn't say. And so his attitude, well, that man, so and so, he needs to just shut up. And so I went to the sheriff the next morning and I said, "Hey, this is what I overheard." His response to me, well, Green, hey, some people are set in their ways. You're just going to have to get along to get along, you know. And and he told me, there's nothing I'm going to do to him. And so I learned at a very early age, at a young age, that that even when you do speak out against racism in law enforcement, that it's going to go on deaf ears. And Vincent experienced some of the same things that I experienced with the Lee County Sheriff Department, and it's unfortunate. And Vincent, there's a whole lot of other uh, people who experienced the same things that we experienced. One of my uncles, he was uh, one of probably five, four or five police officers in Hobbs, and so um, there is racism that exists in law enforcement, and that's a conversation that we've had before. And Keith, as we come to a close on the show, I think one of the things that I would like to to have a conversation with our audience about is the fact that what happens to black police officers when they become whistleblowers? What happens to those men and women who step out and say, "I'm going to speak out against um, racism, or I'm going to speak out against police brutality," and they find themselves on the outside looking in because all of a sudden now the that uniform that you wear is totally forgotten about is the color of your skin because now you're not one of us.
Well, you know what, man? I tell you, it takes a strong person to come forward and be a whistleblower, um, and because there are going to be those individuals that are going to treat that person completely different. Uh, there are going to be those situations within various departments that a person might have to fear their lives. Um, they are going to be retaliated against, and maybe
Yeah.
in a subtle way, sometimes in just a blatant way. It does take a lot to do that. And what you'll find out with most whistleblowers, they've talked about this before, but it's fallen on deaf ears, and
Yeah.
it's gotten to the point to where it's reached a level of where it has it's not getting any better, it's getting worse, and it's going to cause a very adverse effect on the organization and to that person. So it does take a very um, uh, strong person, a person who has a very strong conscience and a very strong heart for wanting to do the right thing. Now, let me just say this: are there some whistleblowers that are looking for something, just for them, self satisfaction? Absolutely. But I do
Hmm.
believe when the ones that I know have done it because they've gotten to the point of they can't take it anymore, and they don't
Exactly.
want to see anything. They believe something has to happen regarding that. I will tell you, back in the when I started, man, nobody whistleblowers. You better not tell. I was kind of an outcast that because I stood up to. I mean, when I got into law enforcement, they were saying the N word and other using other minority and sensitive minority comments
Hmm.
about other races, um, and that was acceptable. And when you would bring it up, you were told, "Hey, you're a police officer now. You can't be offended. Deal with it. It didn't
Yeah.
mean any harm. They're not talking about you directly. Yeah, you're black, but you're not like them."
Yeah.
I mean, and so I'm one of these guys. What do you mean like them?
Hmm.
And when you say that, that can be used against you in the future. I
Yeah.
will say the police chief that I had when I first started had come from California, had come from LAPD, and he was uh, very uh, committed to diversity and unifying the organization. And the union hated him because he did start. You started seeing the classes of minorities increase. My class was one of the largest classes of minority recruits that came through at that time,
Hmm.
and that was a problem. And you would be told that in the academy, hey, this is a quota thing. Some of you all shouldn't be here, but
Wow.
this chief wants to make sure that the community, the police department matches the community, and
Hmm.
so you're here only because he wants you here. That's the kind of stuff you would hear,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so yeah, and
Well,
it says
you got.
do black police officers carry the trauma of work racism into their personal lives? Absolutely, absolutely. Because you have to understand, unless you have that outlet, the things that happen to you in daily can affect you personally. And so when you see this stuff and you can't get any type of can't find any type of solution to it, you do carry that. You then start to believe the entire profession is racist. You do believe that all officers who look a certain way are prejudiced. You do believe that it's unfair. The platform is unfair to you. So yes, it does cause personal trauma, and then you carry that home, and you're grumpy, you're malcontentious. It makes you angry. You continue to talk because you can't let it go. You can't let it go, especially when you feel as though you're being discriminated against. You feel as though you're not being treated away or being treated equitably because of the way you look. Only simply because of the way that you look, not based on your qualifications
Exactly.
or anything. It's just the way you look. You're
The
not,
way you
and
look.
yes, it does. It can have an adverse effect on your personal life. Absolutely, it can.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, man, we're going to end up wrapping up the show, and Nikki has a question what happens to whistleblowers. But Nikki, I'm gonna tell you, that's gonna be a topic of our podcast show on next Thursday. So tune in because we're gonna be talking about what happens with minorities who come out and speak out against police brutality and speak out against racism. When they do become whistleblowers, how are they treated by fellow officers within their police department? And so, again, Keith, brother, it's been a pleasure tuning in with you, joining you for another podcast show. So, man, I think, we've still got a few little kinks to work out on
That's
my
cause you.
end.
That's cause you running the board, man.
So, and I'm going to get the kinks worked out, but, we want to definitely thank Vincent and Nikki and Jamie Davis and Sasha and so many other people for tuning in to the show, and because it's definitely been a pleasure. So uh, definitely tune in next Thursday for another episode of You and the Law podcast show. And thank you guys, and Brother Keith, we'll see you next Thursday, brother.
Peace, man. Peace and love to everybody. Good night.
Uh, all right.